So I went through this video and like looked at the transcript just to see if it was interesting. And hang on. This video is titled The Resurrection of the Unrighteous, Jehovah's Witnesses. I went through the transcript and checked it out. Let's give this a listen, see what they have to say for themselves. Bound to be insane. There been any new Caleb and Sophia videos? Yes, and I covered them recently. But just out of curiosity, let me check the library. Videos, children. Yeah, no, nothing new. Okay.
Our text for today, Acts chapter 24 and verse 15, answers a very important question that affects the lives of billions. Now, to understand that question, I'd like to take you back to a lecture that Brother Russell gave in Shanghai, China in 1912. And he asked this important question basically as a child. I'd like to just quote a portion of that lecture, the beginning, his introduction. He said, "Well, I remember as a child inquiring what would be the fate of the heathen," or today we would say the unrighteous.
That's interesting. Yeah. So Jehovah's Witnesses have this little belief, if you will, that there will be a resurrection of the righteous and the unrighteous at like the end of time. And that's going to lead to like, God, I suck at this. I'm getting distracted by trying to make this work. I forgot how hard this is. Very few people will not make it into the new system, and then they're going to be given an opportunity. The new system being like God's kingdom on earth. Then they'll be given an opportunity to, accept God or reject him if they choose. The people that aren't going to make it, historically, according to Jehovah's Witnesses, are apostates, Adam and Eve, because they already had a shot at perfection, Judas Iscariot, because what he did was so evil, that kind of thing. But when the unrighteous are resurrected, they'll be given another opportunity, basically, which makes me wonder, like, why would anybody bother being a Jehovah's Witness in this world then, If you're baptized, it's too late. You are now you will be an apostate if you decide to leave. So you're kind of SOL on that one.
And the answers that I received, that only through faith in Jesus, the Redeemer, is there any salvation. Then I queried, now here's the key question. What is the penalty of their ignorance of the only name given under heaven, or amongst men, whereby we must be saved? Well, the answer was the usual one of all our Orthodox creeds, that they would spend eternity in a hell of unutterable anguish.
They don't believe in hell. Jehovah's Witnesses don't. And they're actually correct on their interpretation of it. Hell is not in the Bible. People mistakenly believe that hell is in the Bible. It's not.
By the way, guys, check out my new shop, owenmorgan.com/shop. I have a bunch of really cool designs on there.
Well, that's a pretty shocking answer. Eternity of hellfire for what? No chance to learn about Jehovah and Jesus Christ? You're simply born at the wrong time? Really? Well, today, if you ask that same question of many Christian religions, you're going to get some very bizarre and unjust answers. And you can imagine that answer of burning in hellfire for eternity did not sit well with Brother Russell, especially as he got older. And in the rest of his lecture, he explains that it did not match, that answer of burning in hellfire did not match his understanding of a God of love, wisdom, justice, and power.
Yeah, I mean, the Old Testament God is very different from the New Testament God, right? Like, the Old Testament God is like just a monstrously evil being that hates people and takes vengeance on them and everything else. And people realized that. Like, people connected with that, like Marcion specifically, dude named Marcion, back in, the early, I think in the 300s, 400s, somewhere in there, CE, he recognized that there was, like, that the God of the New Testament and the God of the Old Testament didn't seem to be the same God. But as a result of there effectively being two different gods in the Bible, you can justify literally any position. If you're vile and vengeful and hateful and violent, you can justify that position in the Bible. If you're a kind, nice, good person, just wants to take care of your fellow man, you can justify that in the Bible. That is the result of basically Jesus completely like reinterpreting everything. and whoever wrote about him reinterpreting his role.
And he was really excited and amazed when he really understood better the Bible's answer, Jehovah's answer for what would happen to the unrighteous. Well, what does the Bible explain is the hope for the unrighteous, or those who have died without a chance to learn about Jehovah or Jesus Christ?
Again, there is no biblical reason to believe a lot of the stuff that these people believe, certainly not this little section here. But they are correct in that hellfire does not exist. That's not a part of the Bible at all. The places that use the word hell are using it incorrectly. It wasn't originally the word hell. That was added later. Are we all apostates based purely on our criticism of the organization? Not necessarily. Yeah, you are, but you're not an irredeemable apostate. I'm an irredeemable apostate because I was baptized and learned and knew better and chose to attack the organization anyway, quote unquote. So I will uniquely not make it into the new system, but you might because you were deceived by an apostate. You are an apostate for the purposes of them not talking to you ever again, but not for the purpose of making it through to the new system or whatever. Here I was working toward becoming utterly irredeemable, right? Yeah. You have to get baptized as a Jehovah's Witness and then disfellowshipped for that one. Sorry.
Well, Acts chapter 24 and verse 15 is a great place to start. There's going to be a resurrection of both the righteous and the unrighteous. So the unrighteous would include those who in their lifetime didn't have a chance to learn about Jehovah. Good, we might say. Jehovah's not going to leave the unrighteous out. He's going to take care of them. But after reading this one verse, you might think to yourself, well, if both the righteous and the unrighteous are going to get resurrected, what's the point in being righteous if they're both going to get life?
Well, it's too late, is the point. You can't go back on it now. You're already baptized. But yeah, a lot of people ask that question in Jehovah's Witnesses, hilariously.
Well, here's where we need other scriptures in the Bible to help us understand what Jehovah has in mind for the unrighteous. It would be wrong to conclude from reading this one verse that both the righteous and the unrighteous are going to get everlasting life, especially for the unrighteous. In the 2021 annual meeting, Brother Jeff Jackson gave a talk, and he used several scriptures.
Jeffrey Jackson, governing body member, he lied to the Australian Royal Commission when they were asking him about handling child abuse situations, like lied under oath to their faces, and it was a pretty big deal.
And beautiful pictures to explain what the Bible's hope is for the unrighteous. Let's review a few of the scriptures that he highlighted in that talk, and we're going to focus on the resurrection hope for the unrighteous. Let's first look at John chapter 5, verses 28 and 29. John chapter 5, verses 28 and 29. Do not be amazed at this, for the hour is coming in which all those in the memorial tombs will hear his voice and come out. Those who did good things to a resurrection of life, and those who practiced vile things to a resurrection of judgment. Well, did you notice the past tense? Who practiced vile things?
So if you're evil, if you're a bad person, really this is interpreted selectively with them. If you're committing sin and you know that you're committing sin, like, being in a relationship without being married, for example, sometimes that's how it's interpreted. It depends on the situation, and other times it's interpreted as like just being a non-believer.
Well, Brother Jackson explained that the unrighteous are not going to be allowed to practice vile things in the new world. So the past tense of practicing vile things must refer to the things they did in their life before.
That doesn't make any sense. Wait, they're not going to be able to practice vile things? That's not an accurate representation of their belief system. That breaks everything. If they're not going to be able to, then why are there 1,000 years of judgment? It says that after the new system is like brought into place or whatever, people are going to have 1,000 years to like prove their love for God or whatever, and they're going to be given an opportunity to either do the right thing or to fail, to do the wrong thing. And at the end of the 1,000 years, you know what? Maybe he's saying it's at the end of the 1,000 years they'll be given an opportunity. But I thought that the idea was that the 1,000 years is the day of judgment, quote unquote. I don't know. I'm confused about their beliefs. It sounds like they're changing them here.
They got resurrected. Well, what then is Jesus referring to in verse 29 when he talks about a resurrection of judgment? If they're not being judged on what they did before they got resurrected, on what will they be judged? Well, here's where Revelation chapter 20 and verse 12 helps. Revelation chapter 20 and verse 12, "And I saw the dead, the great and the small, standing before the throne, and scrolls were opened. But another scroll was opened, it is the scroll of life. And the dead were judged out of those things written in the scrolls according to their deeds." So the unrighteous will be taught from the new scrolls, and they'll be judged on their obedience.
So their belief is, by the way, they're completely bastardizing and twisting the interpretation of Scripture. So don't take this for what it is. But their belief, at the very least, is that there's going to be a new Bible, I guess, right? There's going to be a new Bible, and this new Bible is going to have new rules in it for these people. And the new rules will be the things upon which these people are judged, it sounds like.
Deeds during the 1,000-year reign of Christ. Well, what if they choose to disobey or not?
There you go. That's what I was talking about, yeah. It seemed super confusing to me that he was breaking this.
Listen to live by Jehovah's standards. Here they are, they're taught, they're explained what Jehovah's standards are from the new scrolls, and they decide not to obey. Well, Isaiah chapter 65 and verse 20 indicates that they will be removed immediately. They'll not be allowed to corrupt the new world with their disobedient attitudes and actions.
My understanding of their belief system is that in the new system, there are going to be 1,000 years of judgment where people are going to be given an opportunity to be good and not sin. And if they choose to be gay again, as they chose this time around, you know how Jehovah's Witnesses view things, then they're going to be slowly taken out. They're going to be killed, basically, judged by God and killed for their sin of being gay. That's the whole idea, I believe. And it's going to be like instantaneously. So the day of judgment at the end of the 1,000 years, it's not a day of judgment at the end. It is the 1,000 years. That's the judgment day. Because, a day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is as a day to God, or whatever the hell they believe, The day-year principle is what that's called. And it's Jehovah's Witnesses' basis for like a lot of their supposed prophecies. It's found in like Numbers, the book of Numbers or something. And it's just debunked nonsense. Anyway, so that's my understanding of their belief system. And it sounds like that he is reiterating that as the belief system. So I was right. What the hell was Jeffrey Jackson talking about then when he said that?
Of course, on the other hand, if they choose to obey and remain faithful under the final test at the end of the 1,000-year reign, they could get everlasting life. And it's this final outcome that is referred to by Daniel chapter 12 and verse 2.
And by the way, everlasting life, not to be confused with immortality. They are different in Jehovah's Witnesses' minds. Immortality means you cannot die. Everlasting life means you will live forever. You won't age, basically. It means you won't age. But you can still actually die. Like, God can still kill you, for example. I think that, like, you can fall off a roof and die or whatever, but accidents won't happen in the new system unless God wants them to. I think that's the belief.
Daniel chapter 12 and verse 2.
Like, I wrote a book about this, Understanding Jehovah's Witnesses, Amazon and Audible. Check it out if you want. And it's so, like, confusing. Like, I used their Bible verses and went through the whole thing beginning to end and how those beliefs came to be and when they were started and who started them and everything. And I'll be damned if it's not confusing as hell. Still, like, it's such a weird, bizarre, winding little path that makes absolutely no sense.
And many of those asleep in the dust of the earth will wake up, some to everlasting life, and others to reproach and to everlasting contempt.
This is Revelation, he said, right? Jesus' apostles believed that the end was coming in their lifetime. They believed that Jesus would be back. It didn't make sense that he died in the first place to them. So they explained his death by saying he would return, which, made things even more confusing. So all this stuff they're describing, specifically in the book of Thessalonians, Paul says something like, the dead will come up out of their graves and meet God in heaven or whatever the fuck, or meet Jesus in heaven. The belief there was created because Jesus wasn't supposed to have died. The end was supposed to come first. And people started getting freaked out. Like, is he, is he not bringing about the end? Was he not our guy? So Paul said, those who have died since he came to be will be resurrected. They'll have a special role in escorting him back to earth from heaven when he returns. That's the basis for the rapture, which Jehovah's Witnesses reject, actually. They don't accept the rapture. They're correct about that one thing.
So at the end of the 1,000 years is to what Daniel chapter 12 and verse 2 is referring to, when the final outcome, either everlasting life or everlasting death. Let's just review these scriptures briefly with this chart on the screen. Acts chapter 24 and 15 and John chapter 5 verses 28 and 29 both refer to the beginning of the 1,000 years when the unrighteous are resurrected.
Daniel, oh my God, in my book, I went through their beliefs about the book of Daniel in such detail, it's ridiculous. You guys wouldn't even believe how much time and effort I spent trying to understand their beliefs about the book of Daniel. It is bizarre, some of the shit that they believe about Daniel. We know what the book of Daniel was actually written about, all of that weird prophecy stuff that they talk about with, the beasts coming out of the sea and all that other weird shit. That's all understood. Like, we know what they were talking about, and it was not what Jehovah's Witnesses think it was talking about. But they've come up with these ridiculous, winding, effectively conspiracy theories to create these brand new understandings of Daniel. And they use the book of Isaiah to understand it too.
Now, on what will they be judged? Well, Revelation chapter 20 and verse 12 explains that during the 1,000 years, the resurrected unrighteous will be taught out of the new scrolls, and they will be judged based on obedience to what is outlined in the new scrolls.
The new scrolls being the new Bible, I guess, is what he's saying. Fascinating. They're going to have a new Bible in the quote-unquote new system. Wow, okay.
Of course, if they choose disobedience, that will lead to removal, as Isaiah 65 and verse 20 indicates. And Daniel chapter 12 and verse 2 refers to the final outcome, the final everlasting outcome for the resurrection of the unrighteous. Isn't it amazing and wonderful to see what Jehovah has in mind for the hope for the unrighteous?
Again, Daniel chapter 2 was not about what they seem to think that it was about. Just reading from my book on this subject, where I wrote about this whole section at length. Hold on, let me make the sidebar go away. Again, you can check it out on Amazon and Audible. So Daniel 2:38 was about Nebuchadnezzar's statue. You are the head of gold. After you shall arise the kingdom inferior to yours, and yet a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over the whole earth. Right, so Daniel had a dream, and the dream was of, or no, Nebuchadnezzar had a dream, I'm sorry, and the dream was of a statue with a head of gold, arms of silver, waist of bronze, legs of iron, and then feet of iron and clay. And Nebuchadnezzar wanted to know what it meant in this story, and Daniel explains that the statue was a representation of the empires that will come along and control, Jerusalem over the coming whatever. And an angel explained what those things meant. An angel explained what those, the head of gold and everything meant. Like, Jehovah's Witnesses retroactively go back to the book of Daniel and look for an explanation for what those things were when they have no place to interpret that because an angel already interpreted it in that section. And the interpretation that the angel gave basically boils down to this. It represented the different kingdoms that would control Jerusalem, and the kingdoms are listed in the book of Daniel. It's, I forget, the Seleucid Empire was one of them, the, Alexander the Great's empire, God, I don't even remember, the Babylonian Empire. It was the empires that had already existed and already, controlled the region up to that point. But the book was written in 164 BCE, before the Roman Empire, about 100 years before the Roman Empire comes along. So they listed the feat of iron and clay, but didn't list an empire for it because they didn't know which one was going to control it. But they said the next one to control it is going to bring, that's going to be the end. God will bring about his kingdom on earth after the next empire comes and goes. Well, the next empire to come and go was the Roman Empire, of course, and it didn't come and go. So Jehovah's Witnesses, and the end didn't come after the Roman Empire fell. So Jehovah's Witnesses reinterpreted it to be different empires, different timelines and people groups and everything that were going to control the region. And they listed themselves as the last controllers of Jerusalem before God's kingdom comes. The Anglo-American Empire, quote unquote, is what they say the feet were. Even though an angel already interpreted that. That's what he's referring to here. And I hear you thinking it's supposed to be like an unbroken line of control. I hear you thinking how do you get to the Anglo-American Empire from the Roman Empire? And the answer is Jehovah's Witnesses believe that as the Roman Empire shrank and was claimed by other its territory was claimed by other empires, they believe that the British Empire eventually became the Roman Empire. The remnants of the Roman Empire reside in the British Isles. My interpretation is the remnants of the Roman Empire are in Rome. That's how I read it. And that's how any other reasonable human being would read it. But okay, I don't speak to God, so, and they do apparently. That's my problem.
The final everlasting outcome for the resurrection of the unrighteous. Isn't it amazing and wonderful to see what Jehovah has in mind for the hope for the unrighteous? Today governments, they fight for their sovereignty. They fight wars over their sovereignty, over this piece of land. And
yeah, they don't they don't have a problem with Jewish people at all, really, but they do not like what is happening in Gaza right now. I don't think that they view it in a prophetic way. They just view it as deeply evil, basically, is my interpretation.
Soldiers and civilians are simply to them collateral damage in trying to establish their sovereignty. Satan has callously sacrificed billions of lives in his effort to challenge Jehovah's sovereignty. But Jehovah, he never considered the unrighteous as collateral damage even when defending his sovereignty. He viewed them rather as precious lives that he's going to resurrect and offer them the opportunity for everlasting life that Satan took from them. The solution that Jehovah has put in place for the resurrection of the unrighteous is yet another beautiful example of the love, wisdom, justice, and power of our great God, Jehovah.
Absolutely fascinating, dude. Wow. So yeah, that was an example of them explaining their whole eschatology is what it's called, their whole end times belief. And it is such a winding, confusing mess, dude. Oh my God. Anyway, yeah, tell me what you think about it in the comments. I'm so entertained by how they twist things around, honestly.